That thing that isn't happening isn't really happening again. It's all made up. It's fear tactics of the right to make you hate me. It isn't really happening. What you're saying isn't true. You're a bigot. You're vile. You're evil. You don't deserve to be a mother. Your lived experience isn't really happening. That thing that isn't happening isn't really happening again. My young autistic children aren't being affirmed and constantly pushed down a path to possibly being a lifelong patient of surgeries and pain. That thing that isn't happening isn't really happening again. My young child did not come back from school pride education spouting about 73 genders and that boys can be girls and girls can be boys. They didn't come home so happy to be embraced into the Pride Club and feel less marginalised. That thing that isn't happening isn't really happening again. My young children were not told about all the different ways to be sexual when neither of them had even kissed or thought about boys or girls in that way, ever. That thing that isn't happening isn't really happening again. My young children didn't end up as pandemic online fodder, showcasing the celebration and glitter of being a whole better, different person that didn't show the mutilation and clinical harm of it all. That thing that isn't happening isn't really happening again. My young, autistic, vulnerable children who started struggling with puberty weren't told they were born in the wrong body and changing sex would cure their uncomfortable, difficult, autistic, non-conforming pubertal feelings. That thing that isn't happening isn't really happening again. My children didn't get groomed online by unscrupulous men preying on their vulnerabilities while the blurring of sexual boundaries was being embedded in their brains and the resilience that had been built previously wasn't eroded by this ideology pushing the wrong feelings. That thing that isn't happening isn't really happening again. My children didn't absolutely ravage their bodies by slicing open their skin and proudly sharing it on Twitter to see if they got the best beans, and they didn't become entrenched in communities that were nothing but self-fulfilling hate chambers. That thing that isn't happening isn't really happening again. My young, vulnerable autistic children didn't believe what school was telling them as fact. They didn't believe that they were being told everywhere by everyone when they went out and about and they were called he or young man all the time. That thing that isn't happening isn't really happening again. My children are not ravaged. They are not confused. They are not disordered. They are not indoctrinated. This isn't happening. It's not real. It's not real. Please, 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 I want to believe this isn't really happening. I identify as a mother whose family this isn't really happening to. It isn't really happening, is it?